All right, so we got our last shot here. Just a quick review of where we've been. We should have a slide up there. So that's just kind of where we've been. We started session 1, this whole idea of living a life worthy of the gospel. Remember, we talked about living in a society that's pushing against the gospel. And so this idea of living worthy by standing together to hold our ground, not to be moved off of truth, and then also to stand firm together for the sake of the gospel, that we would move into that culture with a love and compassion and a gentleness and a boldness for the sake of the gospel. And then, yesterday morning, they're all kind of blurring together. We live a life worthy of the gospel by fighting for this unified mindset against the tensions within the body of Christ. That we would prioritize loving God and loving others for the sake of the gospel, repenting of these selfish mindsets and personal glory. And then last night we looked at the beautiful picture of Christ, our ultimate example. And Paul just says, live like him, accept his mindset, imitate his life, who didn't use his privilege and power for his own gain, but he leveraged them to come down into the mess, to humbly serve others, even to death on a cross. And so this morning we're going to wrap up this last charge from Paul to live a life worthy of the gospel. And we're going to talk about how, if we're going to do that, we've got to continuously work together with God to become like Christ in order to shine like a bright star in a dark world. And so we're going to read our passage, this verses 12 through 16 of chapter 2. Paul says, so remember, we've been talking about this example of Christ, and he's saying, therefore, because of this imitation, or we're called to imitate him, he says, therefore, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life. And so Paul, just as he's looked at Christ, he says, therefore, it's not that we just look at the example of Christ and we delight in it, we worship in it, we meditate in it, but he says there's some action required. There is some work required because of this perfect mindset that's been modeled to us. We have to put some things into practice. We've got to put in the work to imitate Christ and his example. It's not just we enjoy the theology. It's not just we experience this thing. We put some work to it. And so he starts by saying, first of all, he affirms them. He says, as you've always obeyed. Remember, he knows them well. They've been partners. He's seen these good things in their lives, their generosity, their partnership for the sake of the gospel. And he's encouraging them. He's like, God has been doing things in you already. Don't take this challenge to go forward as like you're not doing anything right. He's like, you guys have been obeying. It's been your pattern of life. And he's like, I'm so encouraged by that. And I'll just say, as I've been around you, this has been really true. In the conversations I've had and watching you guys have already been working to put these things into practice. You're asking the right questions. You're struggling. How do I put this mindset on? How do I give my life away to people? How do I put all these things into practice? And I've seen you do it. I've seen you walk in a room and see a need and meet that need. And so I just want to encourage you that you guys are on the path. You guys are on the path. And so I want to encourage you, don't be discouraged with the challenge. You're doing well, but now it's time to keep moving. It's time to keep moving. And so it might be good in your reflection time to just write this question like, what are the steps of obedience that I have taken already in my life, maybe in college or in the past couple years? Just where have I grown? Where has God been growing me already? And just to spend time thanking God for the work he's done in your life. So Paul encourages them, you're doing well, but he knows there's these threats happening, and so he says, okay, now I'm going to urge you on some things. And so he says, just like you've always obeyed, now continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. As you've obeyed, now continue to obey. Continue to put it into practice. Paul kind of turns into a bit of a coach here. He's like a bit of a coach. My son, I think I've got a picture up there. My son Cooper, he just is a freshman this year at K-State, but in high school he ran track, he ran cross country, and so he put a lot of miles in. And in these races, the 800 meter and cross country, they're a little longer. So these coaches, they know there's certain spots in the race where you have to go, either on the track or on the cross country course where it gets hard, where there's this long uphill stretch toward about 3/4 into the race, or on the back stretch of an 800 where your body's hurting and you want to kind of let up. And the coach finds this spot where it's hard. And it's like, okay, you've been running good. Now it's time to dig deep. You're tired. You've got some things going against you, but it is time to dig deep and find the reserves that you've trained for, and they're there. Keep going. Kick it in. And my son had some goals to place in the state meet this year, and he started out running. He was doing okay, but not his up to speed. But about the 300 meter mark left, is like he's got to make a decision. Is he going to dig deep? Is he going to find more reserves in there to keep going, or just kind of let his goal go away? And so the coach is like, it's time to dig deep, and he kicks in, and in the last 300 meters, he passed 8 people to get his goal. But he was exhausted. He didn't think he had it in him, but because that coach is there yelling at him, it's like, it's time, let's go, let's get going. You've been running well, but now's the time, dig deep. That's kind of what Paul is saying. He's like, you've been doing well. You're kind of, this part of the race is getting hard. You're under pressure. There's things going on in your community. So now it's time to find another gear. It's time to find another gear. You've got it in you. The Spirit of God is in you. Now it's time let's work with Him. Let's dig deeper and see it happen. And so he says, you've got to continue. And it's this lifelong process, right? It's a lifelong process of hammering out this mindset of Christ. Just because you're here this weekend, it doesn't mean you're going to go back and in 2 weeks you're going to be there. It's just not the way it works. But we commit to the process of lifelong training, lifelong working it out. This idea to work out means we bring it about, we produce it, we achieve it. And so it can be this kind of weird verse. Some people think, so are we earning our salvation? Like we're working out, we're producing our salvation? It can be a little misleading, and it's a little unclear. And so just an interpretive rule, if you come across an unclear passage, you always interpret the unclear passages in light of other passages that are really clear on that topic. And so if we're kind of like, what does this mean? We go to a clear passage. And so Ephesians 2, 4 and 5, it's on the screen, and 8 and 9. So Paul is clearly saying we're not earning our salvation by our work. He says, because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our transgressions. It's by grace you've been saved through faith. And this isn't even of yourselves, it's from the gift of God. And so Paul is clearly not meaning work hard to make yourself right with God. Instead, he's saying work hard to express in your life, to express in your community life, the dramatic demonstration of the salvation that's already happened in your heart through faith. You've been made a new creation. You've been covered with the righteousness of Christ. You've been justified and made right before God. And when God views you, He sees the perfect obedience of His Son. Now He says, work hard to flesh that out in how you think. Flesh that out in how you organize your life. Flesh that out in your words and your hands and how you relate to each other as a community. It takes a lifelong process of work to work it out into your life. And if we're going to live a life worthy of the gospel, we've got to commit to that lifelong, continuous work with God to shape it out into our lives. We never arrive until Jesus returns or we meet Him after we die. That's when we arrive. So Paul is urging them, work it out, do the work, put the work into it, trust the process. But then he reassures them, it's not your work. He's like, work it out, but it's not your work. It's like, it is our work, but not our work. He says, why should we do that? Because God